News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces, scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Good morning and welcome to Christmas Eve with Michael Portillo. Loosen your belts for a festive feast of arts, culture, politics, good conversation and indeed food. Starting off with politics, three panellists have given up their Christmas Eve morning to help me to dissect some of the big stories, not just the week, but from the year of 2023, which has been a success for two political figures in particular. One of them is GB News' own Nigel Farage, having brought down the chief executive of NatWest Bank over the debanking scandal, and now back in Blighty after his three-week adventure down under, the Reform Party chairman is riding a wave of public attention. How will he use it? Sir Keir Starmer can also enjoy a smile at the end of the year. This time last year, we did not foresee the implosion of the Scottish Nationalists, which should give Labour an enormous boost at the election. Starmer commands a strong lead over Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. Did his overseas adventure to the frozen plains of Estonia on the Russian border help him to look like a Prime Minister? Starmer has indicated a sympathy for changing the law to help with what's called assisted dying. He backed legal reform the last time that this came to a vote in the House of Commons in 2015. I'll be joined by Dr. Mark Pickering, Chief Executive of the Christian Medical Fellowship, to discuss that. And last week, I shared with you the first instalment of my interview with the icon of the silver screen, Leslie Caron. I was delighted by the outpouring of adulation from viewers that it triggered. We have two more instalments for you today in which Leslie Caron reminisces on her Hollywood career, about Dancing with Fred Astaire and about her marriages. All of that to come, but first your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michael, thank you, and good morning to you. Well, flying debris and power cuts could disrupt last-minute getaway plans today, with weather forecasters warning of strong winds across the UK. Millions are set to be on the roads as well today, with the AA saying drivers can expect lengthy traffic jams as people travel to be with their families. The Met Office says gusts of wind of up to 70 miles an hour will hit parts of Scotland and across northern areas of England. Rail services, too, are interrupted today as major London stations, Euston, King's Cross and Paddington, are all closed for essential engineering works. Well, the Prime Minister has urged people to focus on the promise of a brighter future this Christmas Eve as he addresses the nation. Rishi Sunak says Christmas is a time of hope, but it is also important to remember those who are facing difficulties. He thanked the NHS, police and the armed forces for sacrificing their festivities in the service of others. But that comes after the latest round of strikes by junior doctors in England ended yesterday, with the longest walkout in NHS history due to begin on the 3rd of January.
Christmas is a time of peace, joy, compassion, a time of hope and a promise of a better world. And today, as we look ahead, let's keep that promise of a brighter future burning into the new year. Wherever you are, and whatever you are doing for the festivities, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Rishi Sunak, well, in his annual Christmas message, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said, "The story of Jesus Christ is a reminder that in dark times, love and hope are always worth advocating for." Sir Keir Starmer said it is a time to rejoice in Jesus' birth and rekindle bonds as families and friends share joy. He also thanked the NHS, Royal Mail workers and the military for their work over the festive period, praising the generosity of churches and charities.
As communities across Britain gather together for a period of faith and festivities, I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Throughout the Christmas period, we see the bonds of kinship rekindled as families and friends share in the joy, the hope and the optimism that Christmas provides.
Keir Starmer. Now, the Home Secretary has reiterated that the government is working as quickly as possible to stop small boat crossings. Speaking on a visit to Bedfordshire Police Station, James Cleverly said the UK has reduced the number of illegal migrants making their way to Britain by a third, at a time when other European countries are seeing increasing numbers.
I'm not going to aim for an arbitrary point in time. We're working on this as quickly as possible. I visited the team of Border Force officials at Luton Airport earlier who are returning people to their countries of origins, the people who should not be here, the people who have come here illegally. We are sending them home. We intend to make sure we get the Rwanda legislation through as quickly as possible, make sure we have that deterrent, and continue working with the international partners with whom we have fantastic relationships.
James Cleverly. Well, James Cleverly has apologised after joking about putting a rape drug in his wife's drinks just hours after announcing plans to crack down on drink spiking. James Cleverly was joking, apparently, that he puts a little bit of Rohypnol in his wife's drink every night so she doesn't realise there are better men out there. The comments were said to have been made at a Downing Street Christmas party, which are normally off the record, but the Sunday Mirror chose to report them. Let's get down to the top news story of the day. Father Christmas, of course, delivering presents to children around the world. That's due to begin very soon, we understand. We've been tracking him here at GB News. We will, of course, bring you live updates throughout the day as he makes his progress across the globe. We can see he is actually starting to prepare some presents in his workshop, everything wrapped up neatly, and will be setting off from his centre in the North Pole very soon. These pictures coming to us from the North American Aerospace Defence Command, of course, NORAD. And as I say, we'll be tracking Santa throughout the day. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you very much, Polly Middlehurst. As Christmas is upon us, which of the politicians vying to steer the course of this country will be toasting the season with a smile on his or her face? Sir Keir Starmer will be celebrating Labour's sizable lead over the Conservatives, which he's held for a year. He's delivered a Christmas message thanking public sector workers as though he were already in number 10. One character who won't be in Downing Street anytime soon, and who has not even held a seat in the House of Commons, nonetheless commanded attention throughout much of 2023. Nigel Farage captured the headlines when he revealed that his bank account was being closed, apparently on the grounds of his political views. The de-banking scandal lured NatWest Chief Executive Dame Alison Rose into losing her job and over £2 million. He captured public attention again in the Australian jungle on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, where he reached the final and finished third. So the first question to my panel is, what's the secret of Nigel's success? I have with me the freelance political commentator and playwright Emma Burnell, the editor of CapEx, Alice Denby, and GB News' own Nigel Nelson. Welcome to you all, and thank you very much for coming in on Christmas Eve. Nigel, you have been with us since March on GB News. You probably didn't expect in your curriculum vitae to be a colleague of Nigel Farage, but you have been for these last few months. Am I right in thinking that Nigel Farage has something rather special that other politicians might like a bit of? A certain charisma, a certain way of getting through to people?
Yeah, I think the modern word is Riz, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, Riz.
And yes, he certainly does have that. I mean, I've known Nigel for about 12 years, so it preceded my time here at GB News. And he's always been a fantastically charismatic politician. I covered his election down in Thanet South back in 2015, and I left there thinking that seat was a shoo-in for him, that everywhere you went, he was mobbed. Everyone wanted to shake his hand. He then came second, and I think that what happened there is that it was his celebrity status. Everyone wanted to meet him. Everyone wanted to talk to him, to say that they'd been with Nigel Farage. They weren't prepared to vote for him. And having tried 7 times to become an MP, I think he must be thinking, I wonder if I can make it it on an 8th time. But Nigel being Nigel, he's keeping us guessing about what his ambitions are. Will he rejoin the Tory party? Does he have any ambitions to be leader of the Tories? It would be a long way off, but it's not impossible with the state of the Tory party at the moment.
Emma, I mean, for the moment, he's with Reform, and it must be a big question for him what he does next. I mean, he said to me in private conversation, what is the point of helping Labour to get a bigger majority, which is, more or less what that party is going to do, because it's been announced by Richard Tice that their candidates are going to stand against Conservatives, they're going to damage Conservative candidates. That party is going to make a bigger Labour majority, more likely. What on earth is Nigel Farage going to do with this celebrity?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, Nigel Farage, when you use the word charismatic, I think that's often meant to be a positive, but actually charisma is just... the sociologist Max Weber once said charisma is extraordinariness. And I think what Nigel Farage really does very well is embody the everyman, but in an extraordinary way. And that is the secret to his charisma and how he manages to lead. Now, it would be extraordinary to be a shareholder, because Reform is not a party, essentially, it's a company, of which he owns a significant portion of the shares, and then go off and run another party if he were to go and join the Conservative Party. So I think that's got to be part of the consideration. But it is certainly true that without Nigel Farage and his charisma, whether you like him or not, I'm on the left, his politics are anathema to mine, but I am perfectly willing to accept that he's a charismatic figure. But I think it's worth saying that whether you like those politics or not, they are not doing as well under the uncharismatic Richard Tice as they were under the charismatic Nigel Farage.
And Alice, I wonder whether he hasn't shown up the mainstream politicians, both Rishi and Keir. I mean, he really does seem to have something which those two don't have. And I don't quite know why it is that people who lead the main parties at the moment don't manage to cut through better towards the public. As you say, how they can't incorporate the everyman in an extraordinary way. What stands in the way of our big party leaders from being a bit more like Nigel? Well,
frankly, it's easier if you're on the outside, isn't it? It's always easier to be the kind of agitator who's not in the mainstream, and I think that's part of Nigel Farage's talent. I think, he is charismatic, but he's divisive as well. And I do think that if he does choose to return to Reform, there's a very powerful chance that it goes from wherever it is at the moment, 9% in the polls to 13% in the polls, obliterates the Conservative Party. And if you're someone who cares about Conservative ideas, I don't really see why that's a strategy you would pursue.
No, although, of course, there is a theory that the Conservative Party needs to be given a jolly good hiding so that it will sufficiently reform.
I think that's a sort of sod you all prospectus, isn't it? It's not very Conservative.
I don't know. Parties do go through periods of reform.
There is a difference between being right-wing and being Conservative, though. Certainly small c Conservative now. And I think that is where the struggle, certainly within the soul of the broader right and the Conservative Party, is happening. And I think it may well be that Nigel Farage, who is someone who is right-wing rather than small c Conservative, may well want to give that lesson to the Conservatives. You are going to be destroyed by being too small c Conservative and not being more modern right.
But that's the battle that's going on at the moment, isn't it? I mean, it should be going on in opposition, but it's for the heart and soul of the Conservative Party.
Of course.
And it's a battle between the right and the moderates. We'll see after the election, depending how many of them come back, which side ends up winning.
I think it's even a battle for the heart and soul of politics, in as much as, in the same way that I felt before the Brexit vote, there are a lot of people out there, Labour, Conservative and all sorts of people, who simply say, why is it that the political establishment doesn't want to talk about the issue that we want to talk about? And I think it's been so significant recently that it's been revealed that Rishi Sunak could do more about immigration, but is deciding for various reasons not to. We had another U-turn on immigration this week. He's changed the threshold at which people are going to be prevented from bringing in their spouses, a threshold of income. And I just wonder whether it's broader than the Conservative Party. A lot of people out there saying, why is it that politicians will not talk about and address the issue that we're concerned about, which is migration, both legal and illegal. Alice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where reform perhaps has an opportunity, because at the moment we don't really know what they stand for, what their policies might be. But I think if going very hard on immigration, that may be a way that they can distinguish themselves from the Conservatives. And I think that Rishi Sunak has made a few strategic errors when it comes to migration, sticking with the Rwanda policy, which is unworkable and cruel, and not even within his own gift to make it work, because it's for the courts to decide. I think it was a strategic error to appoint Suella Braverman in the first place. I don't think he had to. I think he thought that she had a more following on the hard right of the party than she did. And now we have the legal migration figures, which is a system that the Conservatives themselves designed after Brexit, which is now allowing in almost 1 million people a year.
Well, it's allowing in more than 1 million. The net figure is less than 1 million. But the gross figure is more than 1 million.
Yeah, so net sort of 750. So it's, you know, over 2 years, that's a city the size of Birmingham. It's unsustainable at the level it is at the moment.
Alice, do you mind if I move on? Emma, you say that you're on the left. Let's talk about the left. I mean, it seems to me that Keir Starmer has had a pretty good year, despite the fact that obviously the Hamas incursion into Israel and the war in Gaza has been extremely inconvenient for him, to put it mildly. And yet he's done all right, hasn't he?
He's had a very good year. Yes, obviously, international events Dibboy, as someone once said, have made things in the Labour Party harder, but actually the changes that he made to the Labour Party during the 3 years and the run-up to that, I mean, obviously he didn't know that that was what was going to come, but something was always going to come. But his grip on the party has been such that while that was a moment of difficulty and danger, he actually got through it relatively easily. His performance at conference just after the Hamas attack, the dreadful Hamas atrocity of October the 7th, was exactly the right tone to hit, and not a tone that you might have seen from previous leadership. And that he's largely stuck to that position, cleaved himself mainly to where Joe Biden's been, so sort of followed Biden's journey from, full-throated support of Israel to we do need to make sure that we are having humanitarian ceasefires or, a way for humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. And trying to balance that has been exemplary, I think.
Let me bring Nigel in and ask whether you were impressed by the sight of Sir Keir Starmer in fatigues amongst military folk. But talking about world politics, by the way, in his Christmas message, he doesn't talk about world politics. He's on domestic issues only. But, well, let's take the Christmas message as well. Do you think he's looking prime ministerial, whether he's in Estonia or whether he's congratulating the public sector workers of this country?
That was the idea about wearing an army jacket, certainly. And you could see that the plan is to stick that on election posters and leaflets. I think it backfired a bit. Had I been advising Keir Starmer, I'd have said, perhaps you ought not to wear military uniform, probably better to go into civilian rugged winter wear or something like that. In the same way, I'd have advised Ed Miliband not to eat bacon sandwiches.
I might say that it was my policy with the military to wear, what do you say, rugged winter wear, but civilian rugged winter wear.
I think that's probably right, yeah. As I say, I can see why he did it. There has been a bit of a backlash. It's not a huge deal, but yes, you're right. Everything he's been doing is about being prime ministerial. He doesn't have to do very much to win the election anyway. And as Emma just said, I mean, it's things like the whole thing over the ceasefire in Israel. There's an example of him being prime ministerial over what his party actually wanted. He was saying, no, this is an international emergency. I back the stand of the British government. This is how I will behave when I'm prime minister.
Alice, do you have something contradictory to say to all of that? We're all rather agreeing here that Starmer's had a good year and is doing not too bad a job at looking prime ministerial. Is there anything you want to say against that point?
Not particularly. I'd say I do think he appeared prime ministerial. I think his Christmas message was actually better than Rishi Sunak's. And I think it just shows where, he's there sort of embracing faith, flag and the family and his military fatigues, how far the party's come. You cannot imagine Jeremy Corbyn in his army uniform, more like, shell suit on his allotment. So, I think he has had a good...
And by the way, both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition stressing the Christian message, which struck me very much in both cases. And Nigel, I think you're itching to say something about James Cleverly. What on earth, what accident has he had at number 10? This is extraordinary.
Yeah, I think it is. That, again, this is partly, I think, a part of the disintegration of the Conservative Party, and James Cleverly kind of symbolises it. To turn around and make a joke about a date rape drug like Rohypnol in front of female journalists was incredibly stupid. Now, I know he's apologised for it, but to actually do that on the day he brought in a crackdown on drink spiking is just extraordinary.
I suppose one could say that it was on his mind in some very, very strange way. I mean, I can't make sense of it at all. Can you, Emma?
No, and this is the second time his mouth's got him in trouble since becoming Home Secretary. And he hasn't been Home Secretary that long. You know, you just wonder... Yeah, the last Home Secretary, fairly infamously, her mouth got her in a lot of trouble, her mouth and her pen. And you just think...
Sometimes that was intentional, and this one clearly was not.
No, absolutely. Whereas, yeah, this guy seems to be wandering into trouble on a fairly regular basis.
Alice?
I think this is a storm in a Rohypnol spiked teacup. I think we were talking about, you know, the charm and the charisma of Nigel Farage. James Cleverly is a man with a sense of humour, and he was joking in private.
Then he should be a stand-up comedian, really, rather than a politician.
Alice, may you have a very glittery Christmas, because you're wearing such a lovely outfit there. Happy Christmas to you both. And may I say happy Christmas to all our politicians out there, because they are, after all, public servants, and I feel for them. Thank you for the moment, Emma Burnell, Alice Denby and Nigel Nelson. After the break, we'll mention Keir Starmer again, because he's indicated possible support for a change in the law on so-called assisted dying. I was speaking to the Chief Executive of the Christian Medical Fellowship.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces, scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. Having just returned from Estonia, Sir Keir Starmer was asked by a journalist to respond to comments by Dame Esther Rantzen, who says she will consider popping off to Switzerland if her treatment for lung cancer doesn't go as intended. The Labour leader seemed sympathetic to a change in British law. To discuss with me whether that's a good thing, I'm joined by Dr. Mark Pickering, who's the Chief Executive of the Christian Medical Fellowship and the Care Not Killing Alliance. Welcome to you, Mark. Thank you very much for joining me on Christmas Eve. First of all, do you understand what change is it that people are talking about?
It depends who you ask, Michael, and so many people want to have lots of different changes, and there is a lot of public confusion about that. We're talking about whether there should be a change to the 1961 Suicide Act that still criminalises assisting or encouraging a suicide. We hear lots of talk about, loving relatives being potentially sent to prison for 14 years. That never happens. What we're talking about is a law that actually criminalises bad stuff like encouraging people online to commit suicide. It's not about the loving relatives like Esther Rantzen's family who worry about what would happen if they accompanied her to Switzerland. I think there is a lot of scaremongering around what would happen to family members.
I must say to you that I very much feel that if I were in a position where I thought my life was going to be shortish and miserable and full of suffering, I might well want to take advantage of making the decision for myself about the timing of my death. But you would have an issue with that, would you, Mark?
I think that the trouble there, Michael, is that so much of this is about fear of what might happen. And when we hear people campaigning for the change in the law, usually it's about a very bad story of something that happened and didn't need to go badly, or something that might happen and might go badly. If we actually hear palliative care doctors talking about what usually happens, most deaths can be made comfortable. And the terrible pain, the agony that we hear talked about in campaigns, it's very rarely there. So we do need to have a clear look at what actually is the case. What's a real scandal is that thousands of people die in this country every year without access to the excellent palliative care that is available. So many of these bad stories needn't happen. And I think that's certainly the thing we should be focusing on. In terms of changing the law, I totally understand that people want to have that choice, that control about what happens if things are going wrong. The trouble is the unintended consequences, like we've seen in most jurisdictions that have changed the law. Things tend to go much further and much faster than people anticipate. And we need to think about not about where a law change will begin, but where it will end up in several years' time, say like we see in Canada right now.
It's not just pain that people are worried about, I think. It's the total loss of control over your life. It's the total loss of dignity. It's being someone that you don't recognise. It's being miserable all the time. It's that wish that you just want it to come to an end. Do you understand all of that?
Absolutely, and I've worked as a palliative care doctor. I look after people who are incarcerated, prisoners or mental health patients, and I understand that that loss of control, the difficulty that brings. But I think we need to see the other side of that, and in places where the law changes, we will find, like in Oregon, where more than half of the people who take the route of assisted dying say that they do that at least partly because they feel a burden on their family and carers. We've got to be so careful that the right to die for people like Esther Rantzen with lots of money and autonomy doesn't become the duty to die for the frail elderly people who are dependent on their exhausted family.
Is that what you meant by unintended consequences a moment ago? Tell me about jurisdictions where this has changed and where you say there have been unfortunate unintended consequences.
Yes, I think Canada is an excellent example because they only brought in medical assistance in dying maid, as they call it, in 2016, and that was effectively for terminal illness, similar to what we would propose people would propose in the UK. Within just a few years, there was a court case when 2 disabled people said, well, that's not fair, we want to have it too. And so the law was changed so that now any chronic illness, any disability can qualify you, physical disability. And now next year, they're proposing to change the law so that people with purely a mental illness can access that. And most of us in the UK think, oh, that's going a bit far. We don't hear campaigners generally calling for that, and yet that's the way things go. When you say, well, here's one group that should have it, then the next group say, well, what about us? Or the next group say, what about us? It's very hard to stop that incremental extension.
Well, I mean, you describe those as unintended consequences, but the way you describe it, it's a series of legislative acts by the people who make laws in Canada. And I don't see that Britain need to do that. I mean, each time it is elected politicians deciding the way in which the law should change. I mean, if we stick with what might be proposed for Britain, which is a change in the law regarding terminal illness, and assuming that parliamentarians know what they're talking about and stick there, are your objections the same?
I think there are still significant objections. So take Dame Esther Ransom. She has stage 4 cancer. It's likely to be terminal. And yet she said publicly that she didn't think that she would make her birthday last June, and she didn't think she'd make this Christmas. She's still going strong now on a treatment that wasn't available before. So this idea of prognosis, of saying, well, you've only got 6 months or less to live, that's incredibly difficult. Many of the people that we've heard about campaigning for assisted dying change when they were terminally ill themselves lasted a lot longer than they thought. And so even that is difficult. But I think
Mark,
the more difficult thing is people like Paul Lamb. So Paul Lamb was a campaigner who was in disability, in pain. He was paralysed largely from the neck down for about 30 years, and he called for law change because he wanted to have that right. And yet Dignity in Dying, the main campaign organisation, consistently refused to support him. But you know, they talk about compassion. They didn't have compassion for him. They talk about autonomy. They didn't respect his autonomy. They wanted to have that very tight 6-month mentally competent terminally ill win, which is the way to get it past parliamentarians right now, just like we saw in New Zealand. The parties that got that through on a very tight, focused campaign immediately dropped that after the law was changed and said, yeah, let's go a bit further now. And I think we'll see many people saying, well, this is just a first step. There are many people who suffer at the end of life, and you cannot just restrict it to this very small group of people with terminal illness who, you know, whilst their suffering may be uncomfortable, it is time limited. There are many people who will suffer for many, many years.
It may seem strange at Christmas when we're celebrating a birth to be talking about death, but I think death is perhaps not talked about enough. I thank you very much indeed, Dr. Mark Pickering. After the break, I'll have the second instalment of my interview with the legendary actress and dancer Leslie Caron, who shared with me the inside scoop on her career in Hollywood. Stay with us.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm
not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Last week I shared with you the first instalment of my interview with a darling of the screen during Hollywood's golden age, Leslie Caron. In it she described growing up in France during the Second World War and becoming a ballet dancer. In part 2 of the interview, Leslie tells us how she went from the Parisian stage to the silver screen in California, and in the process she became an icon of French elegance. I was speaking to her in London. Leslie, what age were you when you first came to the attention of Gene Kelly?
By then, I was 17. He saw a proper ballet the next year, and my leading man was Jean Babillet. And Gene Kelly was in the auditorium that night, opening night. Tried to come backstage to meet me, and I'd gone home like a good little girl. I'd taken off my toe shoes and gone walking home. I lived not very far away from the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées, which is beautiful. Somebody said, Gene Kelly was looking for you to say hello and to congratulate you. Oh, who? Anyway, a few days after, I got a phone call. Gene Kelly wants to meet you and do a little test with you. Well, as I was quite polite, I said, oh, okay. So I met him. He gave me a few steps. I thought, well, that's infantile. You know, there were no fouettes and none of this difficult stuff. It was all quite charming. I did it and forgot all about it. And I said to my mother, oh, it was a bore. And she said, well, that's okay. Anyway, we received a phone call from MGM saying she is coming to Hollywood in 3 days.
You?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Did you fly to Hollywood?
Yeah. And they said, well, Mother has to come with you. And Mother was quite bored at the idea of going to Hollywood. Oh. But she came and we had to change planes. We stopped in London and then Newfoundland and then New York. Every time changing planes or something, or, you know, it was the longest journey in the world, 1950. And finally, Hollywood, we were totally dazed by then. They put us up, my mother and myself, in the Beverly Hills Hotel. My mother looked at the bill. It was something like $75 a night. The next morning, she woke me up at 6 and she said, "Honey, we're leaving. This is too expensive." We had something like $250 between the two of us for the week. So we left. She hailed a taxi, and we arrived in Culver City, which is nothing but crew guys and their family. Very nice, gardeners also, lots of Mexicans. And it was by the workers' entrance to MGM. She said, "That'll be just fine, don't have to pay for a taxi."
This resulted in you getting a part in An American in Paris, is that right?
It didn't result. It resulted in starting to work on the film immediately.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I was hired from Paris.
And where did you film the film? In Hollywood or in Paris, or both?
Entirely in Hollywood. Entirely on the back lot. And lot 3, which has the streets of New York, street of Paris, street of, you know, all those phony streets, but quite charming in musicals.
How did you take to the dancing that you were asked to do in Hollywood? Very different from what you were used to.
It just was magnificent. It was wonderfully exciting with the music. I adored Gershwin. I thought Gershwin was really a grand composer. I thought he was one of the top composers. I rated him like Mozart, like Bach, and like any great modern composer. We started working immediately on the piano, and Gene Kelly was doing choreography with his partner choreographer. Her name was Carol Haney, and she was a Jack Cole dancer, top dancer. And she taught me how to dance with my feet straight and not like that. And she taught me everything. And when I do the little introduction number with a chair, she was so sexy when she did that. She brought the chair. Oh. You know, that the censorship came on the set. She said, "This is too sexy, you've got to tame it down." I was doing what Carol taught me.
Mother had told you to look out for Fred Astaire's style. What did you make of the style of the men you danced with, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly?
Well, at first I knew Gene and that kind of dancing, which I'd never seen. We didn't have musicals during the war. We didn't see jazz dancing. We didn't see any of that. So that was totally new. And I thought, that's thrilling, bent knees, you know, lots of shoulders, lots of charm. Years later, Fred asked me to be his partner in Daddy Longlegs. My God, I thought, this is it. This is it. It's fabulous. And I couldn't stop watching him. And the thrill of dancing with him was something cannot be described. His sense of rhythm, which is indicated by a shoulder, by a hand, by, by a movement of the eyes, something like that. His sense of rhythm was remarkable. He had just lost his wife just before the film started. We closed down the rehearsals, and we thought maybe the film is dismissed because he cannot take over, continue. No, after 2 weeks, he said, I want to come back and work. So we started rehearsing. And when we did the first number, I can see the glint in his eye. I can see he really enjoyed it. Because Fred was somebody who loved to fool around. His dancing had a lot of humor, a lot of making fun of himself. And it just was so much fun dancing with him and watching his tempo.
And what would he say about you? He chose you as his partner.
Yes.
What was it about your dancing that he liked?
I was on tempo, is what he said. He said, well, Ginger, she's an adorable girl and I love her. She's great, but, oh, she wobbled. And I must say, when I see a film of them, with them both, I watch the moment when she's going to wobble. And sometimes she does. But he said, I used to have to cut the film really fast because she'd still be, Fred was, and that was it.
But you, Leslie, you did not wobble.
No, I didn't wobble. I had lots of tutoring, and I knew that you don't wobble after the turns and so on. Psst. That's it.
Incidentally, did you know the rest of Fred Astaire's family? Did you know his sister Adele? Did you know his mother?
I knew his mother. I met his mother. I didn't know her then, but I met her years later. I came to Hollywood for an Academy Award or something, and she said something exquisite. Oh, she said, oh, you're the little girl who danced with my friend. And I thought, bless you.
What was the origin of Gigi?
Well, that came from me. That is to say that I suggested it to the producer. The producer, Arthur Freed, is the one who had brought me to Hollywood for An American in Paris. He was the great producer of the best musicals in Hollywood. He came on the set. I was doing Lily, playing a little orphan in drab clothes, drab hairdo, no makeup. That was my idea of doing cinéma vérité. And he said, look at what they're doing to you. I brought you to Hollywood. I made a big star out of you with the greatest dancer in Hollywood. Look at what they're doing now. Those drab clothes, this isn't MGM, this isn't what you were brought in for. Listen, let's do another film together. Have you any ideas? And I said, Gigi? Oh, let me get back to you on that. are his proper words. And he took about a year and a half to gather the rights and to get the best writer, the best music composer, and the best cast.
Gigi is the story of a girl who's brought up to be a courtesan.
In those days, that was a real problem, a real social problem. So the first script, written by Alan J. Lerner, of My Fair Lady fame as well, was quite close to the book by Colette. I thought it was delightful, absolutely wonderful. But it was too raw for America. So this is why Arthur Freed decided to turn it into a musical. That'll drown the fish.
To soften the edges.
Yes.
Yeah. Were you personally shocked by the plot? Or
No.
No. You took these things in your stride.
Well, listen, you've been traveling around the world with a ballet company, and those things happen.
Believe it or not, Mamita, I have a better time with this outrageous brat of yours than anybody in Paris. It'll be marvelous fun.
What time tomorrow will we get? Can I watch you play roulette? May I stay up late for supper? Is it awfully, awfully open?
Gigi, you drive us wild. Stop, you silly child.
You worked on that occasion with Maurice Chevalier?
Yes, and he was delightful, but already quite aged and took great care of himself. He had a butler and a maid at his attendance all the time. He kept himself to himself. He wasn't somebody who fooled around with the rest of the company in between takes, like we all do.
Maurice Chevalier, with his butler and his maid, had he come from a grand background like you?
Oh, no, no. Maurice came from the east of Paris, from the working class.
Yeah.
He was, and that's who liked him. The workers in those days, they were serious plays for the intellectual and upper class, and fun, divertissement for the working class.
Distractions,
Yeah.
entertainment.
Entertainment.
Yeah.
And Maurice Chevalier would sing in those theatres like at Brighton or Blackpool. But he was a huge star. I mustn't belittle him.
No.
He was a mammoth star. And the upper class simply didn't go to that sort of theatre. They've learned since.
You say that Gigi was your idea. Was it possible for a woman in Hollywood to be taken seriously? Did you feel you were taken seriously in those days?
No. I just had a good idea and I didn't invent it. Audrey Hepburn was playing the play, was doing the play on Broadway. It wasn't very imaginative. And I just happened to say, what about Gigi? I knew that would be good for me because I knew I could still play a little girl, even though I was 25, 26 by the time I made. I'm running around like a little girl, but I'm not.
No, indeed.
As a matter of fact, I had a son already. I was married and they had to wait until I gave birth to this baby boy. Doesn't show.
Not at all.
It's something, it's because of my ballet. I knew how to skip around and goof around, you know.
Hollywood recently has come under a lot of scrutiny for its very bad treatment of women.
Yes.
Did that happen in your day?
I'm sure it did, but it depended on the girl. There are girls who let that happen and girls who don't. You don't believe that Olivia de Havilland ever had trouble with her producer. do you? No, she never did. Vivian Leigh never had trouble with a producer. Unfortunately, it depended on the type you were. If you came in with a décolleté like this and, you know, sashayed into your chair, you could be thought to be an easy girl and so on. So it was difficult to play that part on the screen, but be different in life.
That was the wonderful Leslie Caron, and there'll be more from her in the next hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. So please stay with us. Thank you.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I am Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. A windy picture as we go through Christmas Eve, some strong and gusty winds, bright in the north, damp in the south with some outbreaks of rain. Courtesy of this low pressure, damaging gusts of winds possible across the north of the UK, 60, 70 miles an hour. Met Office warnings in force. Further low pressures moving in for Christmas Day itself. So a bit of a north-south split through Christmas Eve. Sunny spells, blustery showers across the northern half of the UK. Wind gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, so do take care if travelling. Further south, cloudy across England and Wales. Outbreaks of rain heavy across Wales for a time, and mild for everyone, exceptionally mild, 14, 15 Celsius, making it one of the warmest Christmas Eves on record. As we move through the evening and overnight, further outbreaks of rain across southern parts of England and Wales. The winds stay strong for a time across northern Scotland, but easing later on. Clear spells here allowing a frost to form, but elsewhere generally mild, cloudy and showery outbreaks of rain with a brisk wind, and temperatures generally holding up. 11, 12 Celsius in the south, falling close to freezing. A few icy stretches to take us into Christmas Day here. And for Christmas Day itself, a lot of cloud across England and Wales. Some early brightness, but outbreaks of rain here, turning heavy at times too. Blustery showers further north, these falling as snow across the higher ground of Scotland, where it will be quite a cool day. Blustery for everyone, but exceptionally mild in the south, 12 or 13 Celsius.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the second hour of Christmas Eve with Michael Portillo. Let's while away the hours until Christmas with some arts, culture, good debate and mince pies. It's not a season of good cheer in Gaza or much of Ukraine, which is still battling Russian invaders, but with fading support from the United States and the European Union, while Western governments are balking over the scale of casualties that Israel is inflicting in its fight against Hamas. I want to ask whether the West's lack of stomach for the battle indicates that it's lost sight of its own interests, and I'll be joined by the retired Colonel Richard Kemp. We've counted down to Christmas over the last few weeks by sampling seasonal desserts and wines, and later we'll have a special take on those festive favourites. Patty Slowly is a Ghanaian chef who puts an African twist on traditional British Christmas treats. And I'll show you the final part of my interview with Leslie Caron, the star of the silver screen whose wonderful dancing entertained generations of moviegoers in pictures such as An American in Paris. Before all that, though, here are your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michael, thank you, and happy Christmas Eve to you. The top story from the GB newsroom is that flying debris and power cuts could disrupt the last-minute getaway plans of people today, with weather forecasters warning of very strong winds. Millions are set to hit the roads today. The AA guessing around 16.5 million extra cars will be on the road, and so, of course, there will be lengthy traffic jams. The Met Office, though, says gusts of wind up to 70 miles an hour are going to hit parts of Scotland and northern parts of England as well. And rail services are to be delayed today as major London stations, that's Euston, King's Cross and Paddington, are all closed for essential engineering works. Travel editor Lisa Minnow advises careful planning.
Services are going to be finishing much earlier than usual. Northern trains, again, having problems due to number of staff availability, so lots of trains being cancelled there. Anyone who's looking to take a train today, please check before you leave the house because things are not looking 100% great. On the roads, it's going to be very busy. 21 million trips are being taken over this weekend as people head home for Christmas. And we've got that lunch crunch that should be the one that you're trying to avoid. So between the hours of 12 and 2, that's where motoring organisations say the roads are going to be at their busiest.
Lisa Minnow. Well, the Prime Minister has urged people to focus on the promise of a brighter future in his address to the nation on this Christmas Eve. Rishi Sunak says Christmas is a time of hope, but it's also important to remember those who are facing difficulties. He thanked the NHS, police and armed forces for sacrificing their festivities with their families in the service of others. And his message comes after the latest round of strikes by junior doctors in England ended yesterday. The longest walkout in NHS history is due to begin on the 3rd of January.
Christmas is a time of peace, joy, compassion, a time of hope and a promise of a better world. And today, as we look ahead, let's keep that promise of a brighter future burning into the new year. Wherever you are, and whatever you are doing for the festivities, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Rishi Sunak, well, in his annual Christmas address, the Labour leader says the story of Jesus Christ is a reminder that in dark times, hope and love are always worth advocating for. Sir Keir Starmer saying it is a time to rejoice in Jesus' birth and rekindle bonds as families and friends share joy. He also thanked the NHS, Royal Mail workers and the military for their work over the festive period, praising the generosity too of churches and charities.
As communities across Britain gather together for a period of faith and festivities, I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Throughout the Christmas period, we see the bonds of kinship rekindled as families and friends share in the joy, the hope and the optimism that Christmas provides.
Keir Starmer. Now, the Home Secretary has reiterated that the government is working as quickly as possible to stop small boat crossings. Speaking on a visit to Bedfordshire Police Station, James Cleverly said the UK has reduced the number of illegal migrants reaching Britain by a third at a time when other European nations are seeing numbers increase.
I'm not going to aim for an arbitrary point in time. We're working on this as quickly as possible. I visited the team of Border Force officials at Luton Airport earlier who are returning people to their countries of origins, the people who should not be here, the people who have come here illegally. We are sending them home. We intend to make sure we get the Rwanda legislation through as quickly as possible, make sure we have that deterrent and continue working with the international partners with whom we have fantastic relationships.
But James Cleverly has had to apologise for joking about putting a rape drug in his wife's drink just hours after announcing plans to crack down on drink spiking. James Cleverly reportedly joked he puts a little bit of Rohypnol in his wife's drink every night so she doesn't realise there are better men out there. The comments were said to have been made at a Downing Street party, which are normally off the record, but the Sunday Mirror chose to report the comments. The Royal Navy is deploying a warship to Guyana as tensions grow with neighbouring Venezuela. HMS Trent will take part in joint exercises in the region, with the Ministry of Defence confirming it's part of the government's defence diplomacy. The UK is working with the South American nation to ensure its territorial integrity after a historical dispute with Venezuela over minerals and oil. His Majesty the King will deliver his second Christmas message from a room decorated with a living Christmas tree for the first time. If you're watching on television, you can see this photograph that's been released ahead of tomorrow's broadcast, traditionally, of course, at 3 p.m. The King is a long-term environmental campaigner, so sustainable and natural ornaments apparently hanging from his Christmas tree in the background, which will be replanted, he says, at a later date. Now, let's just bring you some breaking news. We can take you live to the North Pole, where we understand Father Christmas is finally on his way. He's begun his journey delivering presents to children around the world now. That's the ones, of course, who are on the nice list. These live pictures coming to us from the NORAD Santa Tracker, the North American Aerospace Defence Command, monitoring Santa's movements so he can get on safely with his job to deliver those presents across the world. You can see Santa's just taken off from the North Pole. NORAD tracking his annual trip since 1955, we're told, after one child phoned through to the command centre asking where he was. Well, now we all know. This is GB News. Across the UK, on your TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you very much, Polly Middlehurst, and welcome back. Congressmen in Washington, D.C. have returned home for the Christmas break without agreeing new aid for beleaguered Ukraine, which continues to fend off the Russian invaders. Supplies of military aid for the country have slowed, and a package from the European Union has been vetoed by Hungary. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, condemnation of Israel's military operation in Gaza is growing. The former British Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, accused it of engaging in a killing rage. To discuss whether, as the West gets cold feet, it understands its own interests, I'm joined by former British Army officer Colonel Richard Kemp and former foreign correspondent and author of Reporting the War in Ukraine, Paul Connew. Welcome both to GB News. Richard, may I start with you? How concerned do you feel about the interruption of supplies and, I would say, the lack of commitment now to Ukraine?
Well, first of all, Michael, thank you for having me, and happy Christmas to you and all your viewers from the Holy Land. I'm actually quite close to Nazareth. This is the place, of course, where it all began. In terms of Ukraine, I think the Western world, Europe in particular, and to an extent the US, were becoming, shall we say, war weary of Ukraine after getting on for 2 years of conflict there, and particularly without much success in the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which began many months ago and has now effectively stalled. And that, on top of that, we've got the situation in the Middle East, which has distracted the attention of so many world leaders, as well as the media, of course, which is pretty important to keeping people focused on Ukraine. And I think that's only added to the war weariness as well. And in addition to which, there is significant amount of military supplies being sent to the Middle East for Israel, which were originally destined for Ukraine. So I think, a combination of events, not least the failure of Ukraine, unfortunately, to make real headway in the offensive, and the Middle East war has been a really serious problem, and I think will develop in a very negative way in the future.
Paul Connew, if I may turn to you. People are now talking about Ukraine losing. President Zelensky is having to deny that his country is losing. Can the West countenance Ukraine losing? What are the consequences, do you think, for the West if Russia is allowed to succeed in Ukraine?
The consequences would be absolutely immense, Michael. Talking a few days ago to some contacts, well placed in Ukraine, media and officials, the thing that's really terrifying them more than anything else is the very real prospect of Donald Trump being re-elected in the US, because they think they would certainly be doomed then. But even now, of course, they are worried about what's happening with the US Congress still not sanctioning President Biden's proposed next arms commitment. Also, of course, as you said, Hungary are blocking, and also the new Polish foreign minister returned from Kyiv I think on Friday, saying that arms production in Europe, we are behind the curve, and he's right. I think there's a very real danger that not only is the offensive now blocked, and at stalemate, but Russia are mobilizing, on a complete war economy that Putin is determined to push through. And I think there's a very real danger that Ukraine could lose. And that I think that the message for Europe is actually chilling out of that. It's not just about Ukraine, it's about the potential for Russian expansionism beyond Ukraine.
Paul, then, can I put it to you, if it's evident to me and it's evident to you that the consequences of a Russian victory in Ukraine are appalling for the West, how is it that Europe and the United States appear to be allowing this to happen?
I think there is fatigue in parts of Europe. I think Britain has been absolutely steadfast, but others are less so. And though I'm somebody who is no fan of Boris Johnson, I support his commitment to Ukraine, even though he wants to almost sort of mitigated Putin's invasion of Crimea back in the EU campaign in 2016. But since then, I think Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister, he was solid on that, and Britain needs to stay solid with Ukraine. But I fear that others in Europe are not so committed. And as was said earlier, we have a situation where in media terms, political terms, diplomatic terms, the situation in Gaza has rather eclipsed, the Ukraine crisis.
Let me go back to Richard Kemp, if I may, and indeed turn to the situation in Israel and Gaza. There has been a big change of tone by Western leaders, much more criticism of Israel and the tactics that it is employing. I was recently in Normandy, and it struck me how many French civilians were killed in the build-up to and the invasion of Normandy in 1944. But we do not seem to be able to apply the same standards, one might argue, to what is happening in Gaza, where the West is really very alarmed indeed by the numbers of civilians who have been killed. Is this change of tone really significant, Richard? And does it show also a kind of lack of stomach for what needs to be done if Israel is to overcome Hamas?
I think there is an element of that as well, and even more recently than the Normandy campaign. Of course, we had the destruction of the Islamic State, not totally destroyed, but the campaign against Islamic State, in which large numbers of civilians were also unfortunately killed by the coalition, which was not focused on in the same way as the campaign in Gaza. I think the reality is that Israel cannot achieve its objectives of defending its civilian population from Hamas without, unfortunately, killing many civilians and probably many more, unfortunately. And that's partly due to the way that Hamas fight. They hide behind human shields. They use the civilian population to protect them. They want Israel to kill their civilian population just so that the world does turn on Israel and pressure Israel to stop. It's part of their long-term tactics and strategy. I would say, however, that I certainly detect from over here that the comments by world leaders, including President Biden and Rishi Sunak, are more for the consumption of the anti-Israel electorate that they obviously have to take account of as well, those people who do not want Israel to prevail in this. And so, therefore, some of the comments they're making, I think, are more aimed at them rather than actually attempting to pressurize Israel into stopping fighting or even changing the way they fight. Because I think these leaders, Biden, Sunak and others, recognize that they're well briefed on what's happening. They get detailed daily briefings. They know exactly what's going on, and they know that this is the only way Israel can fight. And I don't detect really very much direct pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu from people like Joe Biden, he's the real man that counts in this outside Israel.
That's an interesting view. Paul Connew, are you in agreement with what you've just heard?
Not really. I'm a great supporter of Israel, but not of the Netanyahu regime. And obviously, I totally condemn Hamas, the terrorist organization, and the events of October the 7th were barbaric and obscene. But I think the current Israel strategy is way over the top. The civilian carnage is unacceptable in human terms and counterproductive. It is only going to create new generations of, if you like, extremists in our eyes, but obviously not extremists in their eyes, with the consequences of what's happening there. I think Israel could have fought a much more. I know Richard's the military man, and I've been a former war correspondent, not a soldier. But I think the approach could have been different. And I think Joe Biden has real pressure, not just from within the Democratic Party, but also some in the Republican Party. And of course, we always have the bizarre situation of President Trump, formerly a huge admirer and friend of Netanyahu, who is now condemning him. But it turns out that he's condemning him because Netanyahu didn't come out and support Trump's allegations of a stolen election, which I think is again chilling the prospect of both in the Middle East and in Ukraine, the dangers of a Trump re-election. But it's a very real possibility, according to the polls.
Thank you very much to you both. Thank you for joining me on Christmas Eve to debate what I think is this very important question of is the West losing sight of its own interests in Ukraine and in Gaza. Many, many thanks indeed to Paul Connew and Richard Kemp. After the break, Ghanaian chef Patty Slowly will be putting an African twist on some festive British classics. Stay with us, please.
Hello there, I am Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. A windy picture as we go through Christmas Eve, some strong and gusty winds, bright in the north, damp in the south with some outbreaks of rain. Courtesy of this low pressure, damaging gusts of winds possible across the north of the UK, 60, 70 miles an hour. Met Office warnings in force. Further low pressures moving in for Christmas Day itself. So a bit of a north-south split through Christmas Eve. Sunny spells, blustery showers across the northern half of the UK. Wind gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, so do take care if travelling. Further south, cloudy across England and Wales. Outbreaks of rain heavy across Wales for a time, and mild for everyone, exceptionally mild, 14, 15 Celsius, making it one of the warmest Christmas Eves on record. As we move through the evening and overnight, further outbreaks of rain across southern parts of England and Wales. The winds stay strong for a time across northern Scotland, but easing later on. Clear spells here allowing a frost to form, but elsewhere generally mild, cloudy and showery outbreaks of rain with a brisk wind, and temperatures generally holding up. 11, 12 Celsius in the south, falling close to freezing. A few icy stretches to take us into Christmas Day here. And for Christmas Day itself, a lot of cloud across England and Wales. Some early brightness, but outbreaks of rain here, turning heavy at times too. Blustery showers further north, these falling as snow across the higher ground of Scotland, where it will be quite a cool day. Blustery for everyone, but exceptionally mild in the south, 12 or 13 Celsius.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK. Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, you may have thought that the humble mince pie had been re-engineered in every way possible, but the answer is not yet, because I'm now joined by Ghanaian chef Patty Slowly, who likes to put an African twist on British festive desserts, and she's brought in some wonderful treats to the studio. Patty, thank you so much for giving up part of your Christmas Eve to be with me.
Thank you so much. Lovely to meet you.
Let's first of all introduce our landscape of delicious food here. What have you brought?
I've got plantain mince pies. I've got 2 plantain cakes. This one's gluten-free, and one of them one's gluten-free and one's vegan. They're both vegan, really, but one's gluten-free with almond flour. And I've got some mascarpone cream to slather that with, and some icing sugar to go over the mince pies.
Just before we attack these gorgeous things, tell me a little bit, give me a background on Ghanaian cuisine and how it would relate to all of this. First of all, what are the staples of Ghanaian cuisine?
Cassava, yams, plantain. If I can put plantain in anything, I will. It's in a cake and in mince pies. Lots of meat, lots of fish, seafood, lots of exotic fruit. Delicious food, really. In 3 words, flavour, flavour, flavour.
And what about the influences upon it? Because, I mean, we have to talk also about colonial influences. Are we able to do that?
Do you know what? Ghana, the Portuguese were in Ghana for 300 years.
Goodness.
And we still have a lot of Portuguese influence in our language, in the words we use, and in our foods as well. Bacalhau, we use all the time.
Right.
Salt cod.
And how do Ghanaian people feel about the fact that their food has been influenced by the coloniser?
I tell you what, we're not worried at all. The Danes were there, the British were there, the Dutch were there. Bring it on. Food is delicious, and food breaks lots of barriers. And we absolutely love our food. Flavour with chilli. I didn't even realise that chilies came from Portugal. You know, the Portuguese introduced chili to Africa, to Ghana, West Africa.
You have travelled the world, and would it be fair? And would it be fair to say that on a bit of a mission about Ghanaian cuisine, or maybe more broadly African cuisine as well? Is that true?
I tell you what, I lived in America for a year as an exchange student. And in high school, I was 16, 17, and nobody knew anything about Ghana or its food or what have you. And it's really pushed me. As a child, I went to an international school in Ghana, so I mixed with kids from all over the world. And it really is something I absolutely adore, to pull in different cuisines and bring them in. And we don't mind at all. We've got lots of influence in Africa. I mean, North Africa has got the Mediterranean food trickling in. East Africa's got the Indian Ocean. The Indians brought their spices in. South Africa's got the Cape Malay and Indonesian influence. Then you come to Sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana. The Portuguese were there. Then there's French-speaking Africa. So I tell you what, we're swimming in it. Great food.
And do you mind me saying that you're married to a gentleman from Devon?
That's right.
Have you had to educate him in this food?
I absolutely have. I've introduced him to garlic, ginger, all of that. It's on his shopping list now, all the time.
Have you been introduced to scones and creams and jam?
The first thing we do when we go to Devon is go for Devon scones and cream. That's lovely.
I can't remember which way round you do it, but there's a Devon way and a Cornwall way.
I know.
Right.
I know.
Let us attack.
We?
I think the end of it should be the mince pies.
Okay.
Because they're so absolutely seasonal, aren't they?
Righty-ho.
But begin to introduce me now to your plantain loaves.
This has got to be the one with ground almonds, I can tell, because it looks quite grainy. So there we go, Michael. Oops-a-daisy. Let's get a slice onto your plate.
You're so kind.
There we are. And I'm going to put some cream on it. This is mascarpone cream with coffee. So there we go. Do you want to scrape that on?
Thank you very much
indeed. There you go. Enjoy.
Lovely. So tell me what's in here then.
So this has got no sugar, no butter.
That's extraordinary.
No eggs.
Yeah.
You can't have your cake and eat it. It's got raspberry, raisins, vanilla, cinnamon. It's really spiced up. Is it good?
It's absolutely marvellous. And I'm so reassured by what you said, there are no artificial sugars. Of course, it's quite sweet because you've got all those sugars from the fruits.
From the fruit.
The,
Yes, that's
the
right.
natural sugars.
Yeah, and the raspberry, you know, a little tart to give it that balance.
Mascarpone, there's not much Ghanaian about mascarpone.
Not at all, but I told you, with Ghana, we take everything. The British were there, so Ghanaians are eating, you know, so everything. There's the trifle. We grew up with all that sort of blancmange, all that. You know, so yeah.
That's beautifully fruity.
Lovely.
I'm not sure you can do better than that. But introduce me to your second loaf.
Right, OK, let's cut this. Move that down a bit.
So we're opening up.
So this one, ooh, there we go.
Much lighter in colour.
Much lighter in colour.
How do we account for that? Why is it lighter in colour?
I really don't know. I think the ground almonds in this gives it a slightly
Would you mind
different
passing me a
twist.
plate?
Yes, certainly. Ooh. Never
Yeah,
mind.
that's all right.
You sure?
Let's not be polite about this.
Okay.
Right.
A bit more cream?
Yes. Hit me with the mascarpone again.
That's it. You say it very much like the Italians do mascarpone.
Mascarpone. Now, what is the difference between these two?
Now, this has got self-raising flour. Exactly the same ingredients as this. And this one here has got ground almonds for gluten-free.
Yes.
So they're both totally vegan. And like I say, no sugar, no butter, no eggs, no kidding. You can have your cake and eat it.
But this is absolutely brilliant as well.
Good, isn't it?
I would say it's slightly less fruity.
OK.
But it's... And these are sort of great alternatives to Christmas cake and Christmas pudding.
It's like a light Christmas pudding or light Christmas cake. They called it Christmas on a plate.
How complicated to make? I mean, Christmas pudding and Christmas cake
The
are
easiest-
incredibly complicated.
Do you know what? There's nothing to this. Blend your plantain. Blend that. A couple of tablespoons of oil, rapeseed oil. Vanilla. Almond extract. Chocolate buttons. Dark chocolate, which is good for you. The raspberry and the raisins. And fold that with the flour. That's it. And tip it into... I use the silicone loaf tins, which makes it so easy. They just flop out nice and easy afterwards. It's just so easy.
Yes.
So that will use self-raising flour and baking powder, and this will use ground almonds with a bit of baking powder.
It is time to go to the mince pie.
Time for the mince pies. Let's get
Would
this
you
in
very kindly
shot.
pass me yet another plate, please? Would you recommend
There you go.
mascarpone with
I've
my
got to
mince
put
pie?
some icing
Oh,
sugar
icing
on there
sugar.
for you. Oh. You can put the cream on as well. Why not?
So you've made this in a spiral.
In a spiral, just cut strips of the pastry and wrap around the plantain.
Anything unusual about the pastry?
Shop bought, short crust.
Oh, right, OK.
Nice and easy.
But the point is that the filling is plantain. Here we go.
Yeah, there's plantain filled with the mincemeat. How's that?
It's superb. Brilliantly fruity.
Super. And
Well.
And anybody who doesn't like too much sugar, these are great. You know?
Yeah, and what about the mince pie? Is the mince pie also less sugary than its equivalents?
It's less sugary because I've hollowed out the plantain, sat it on there, so it's very little filling. And for the filling, sometimes I'll cook some apples, cook it down and add it to the mixture as well to fill.
This is brilliant. I can't think of a better way of spending Christmas Eve. Tell me something about that beautiful coat that you're wearing.
Oh, thank you. This is from Ghana. I have a seamstress in Ghana. She's super. And she makes all my lovely, colourful clothes.
And when you came in, you mentioned that you like to hug.
Yes, I'm a hugger.
Well, I want to thank you for this brilliant food, and I want to wish you a very happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas to you too, Michael.
Thank you very much
Happy
indeed.
Christmas. Thank you for having me. And Merry Christmas, everyone.
That's so lovely of you. Thank you very much to Patty Slowly. In a few minutes, we'll have the final instalment of my interview with the legendary actress and dancer Leslie Caron, in which she shares details of her personal life. But before that, here are your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michael, thank you. The headlines this hour. Flying debris and power cuts could disrupt last-minute getaway plans today. Weather forecasters are warning of strong winds. Millions on the roads as well today. The AA saying drivers can expect lengthy jams as people travel to be with their families. The Met Office says wind gusts of up to 70 miles an hour will hit parts of Scotland and northern areas of England. Rail services are going to be disrupted as well as major London stations Euston, King's Cross and Paddington closed for essential engineering works. And the Prime Minister is urging people to focus on the promise of a brighter future. In his address to the nation this Christmas Eve, Rishi Sunak says Christmas is a time of hope, but it is important to remember those who are facing difficulties. He also thanked NHS staff, police and the armed forces for sacrificing their festivities with their families in the service of others. His message comes after the latest round of strikes by junior doctors. And the King will deliver his second Christmas message from a room decorated with a living Christmas tree for the first time. A photograph has been released ahead of tomorrow's broadcast. King Charles, a long-term environmental campaigner, so we understand sustainable and natural ornaments hanging from His Majesty's tree. And don't forget, of course, you can watch the King's message right here on GB News live at 3 o'clock Christmas Day. The Royal Navy is deploying a warship to Guyana as tensions grow with neighbouring Venezuela. HMS Trent will take part in joint exercises in the region, with the Ministry of Defence confirming it's all part of the government's defence diplomacy. The UK is working with the South American nation to ensure its territorial integrity after a historical dispute with Venezuela over minerals and oil. Very sadly, got to bring you some breaking news coming to us from Northumbria. Police appealing for information and witnesses after 2 teenagers were killed in a 3-car collision in Cramlington just before 9:30 last night. We can tell you that 18-year-old Connor Lapworth and 15-year-old Corey Mavin, both from Blythe, died from their injuries as a result of that crash. Their families are being supported by liaison officers. But police are asking for anyone with any dash cam footage or any witnesses to come forward. Those are the latest news headlines. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Hello. We return now to Leslie Caron. Here is the final instalment of my interview with the Hollywood dancer and actress. Having guided us through her childhood in wartime Paris, her discovery by Gene Kelly, dancing with him and then with Fred Astaire, Leslie now shares with me details of her personal life, her great loves and the giants of their age who were her closest friends and associates. Please enjoy. Tell me about this gentleman here.
That is Jean Renoir, looking like a Russian oligarch. He was sort of my father. In Hollywood, he was my father very much. He and Isherwood were my two fathers. And here's Nureyev.
Was it easy to get on with Nureyev?
Oh, yes. He was really the sweetest friend in the world. He missed his Russia, his family, his mother. He, of course, had moments of exaggeration and drama, but he wanted perfection. He was hard-working as anyone ever was. He couldn't understand what was happening to him. He went to his doctor and said, "Doctor, I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm so tired all the time." And the doctor said, "Rudolph, you have AIDS." He couldn't understand. No. He was hungry for life. After having danced, after we had supper, after we had talked and giggled and so on, he was going to night films to educate himself on English language and English style. He was a voracious learner. I adored him.
Leslie, do you mind me asking, what were your experiences of marriage? Did marriage agree with you?
Well, I was very Catholic. I was brought up very properly Catholic. So I did believe in marriage. And my first marriage was with somebody whose father was a remarkable man who had started Spam and the great pork industry. And he, during First World War, had married a French girl. So I really married his mother, a French woman. I felt at home. And my first marriage crashed when I discovered I was married to the son, not to the mother. And she was great fun, a bit too much, perhaps. But there was no communication between Geordie and I. And I discovered that he was hooked on drugs. Yeah, there was no communication. And I couldn't understand why. I didn't know anything about drugs. I didn't know anything about life. You're a dancer, you're showing yourself, you know. But you can be as naive as a little girl. My second is Peter Hall, and that was a great marriage. Only the trouble is Peter had his vision of his career, and it didn't include me. And Peter was a Suffolk boy. His father was really a railroad master in a little village. Father and mother were simple people, adorable people. But there was a world of difference in Peter's vision of what a wife should be, like in the kitchen, and that's it.
Literally you in the kitchen?
Yes, and in those days, that's the way the British saw women. I remember being pregnant and needing food quickly, and Peter said, well, there's only a pub. I said, what's wrong with a pub? Let's go in, have a sandwich. And he said, a woman can't get in a pub. And we forced our way. And I saw all the men turning around and looking, a woman in a pub. I mean, you know, the days were very, very different. And Peter had been brought up like that, although he'd gone to Cambridge with honours and put on all the best plays, French plays, American plays, English plays. He was still absolutely brought up in the working class of Britain, which was very narrow-minded. Foreigners, I remember trying to rent a house when Peter was showing a play at Brighton, and looking for a house. I had a nanny for my baby, a cook, and a secretary. And the lady who received us in the little house for rent asked us, your nanny is French, and your cook, she's German, and your secretary, she's French. I'm afraid the house is not for rent.
It's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing.
And that was in the 60s.
Who were your very favourite people that you came across professionally?
Christopher Isherwood, Jean Renoir. I was lucky. I really had fabulous people around me. I have a picture of René Clair, divine director for comedy. I married a witch. It happened tomorrow. That sort of wonderful, fast comedy, witty, 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 about the insanity of the world.
Now, look here, Jennifer.
I don't like the tone of your voice.
Well, I swallowed some smoke last night, and I've just swallowed some more now. But that's not going to stop me from...
Wally wants a drink of water. Nice, cool water.
Thank you. Now, all I have to say is...
Drink it, Wally. And then I'll be glad to hear anything you have to say. You'll find out that no one named Wooly is able to stay away from me.
Oh!
It's just divine fluff, like most of the films of that period before the Second World War. Absolutely delicious, wit, fast, modest, disciplined, disciplined. And I'll say it again, disciplined. And Christopher Isherwood was the center point of where everybody from Europe landed for dinner, talked, and found comfort, friendship, wit, charm.
This is Isherwood as quite a young man. When do you think this was taken?
When he was in Berlin, I think, after Oxford, where he was sent down because he wrote his exams in Latin, if you please. I mean, I think he should have been given a gold medal for that.
So this is about the time that he was writing Mr. Norris Changes Trains.
Exactly, yes.
Brian Forbes.
Brian Forbes was wonderful. The best of British, knowing everything about acting, everything about directing, everything about writing. Having been an actor since Yates Hall and too short to make it as a star. He was just about my size. Like Dickie at Canberra, same, both quite short, and it started making films together. Wonderful pair. And I loved British films. I loved the wit, even though at that time films had suddenly slowed down. It was the fault of the actor studio. You had to feel things profoundly before you could emote it. And boy, did they take time. They waited for it to come up, you know.
A few days ago in Kensington, you were walking down the street and you bumped into someone else from Hollywood.
Dustin Hoffman. I was walking home after dinner with a couple of friends. We were crossing this group, one man with white hair and two women. And he said, "Wait, I think you would like to meet this lady. It's Leslie Caron." He went absolutely insane. He said, "Oh my God, I was so in love with you." And I said, "Oh, I never missed any of your films. I see your name, I rush and go and see it, and it's always good, you're fabulous." And he said, "Let's make a film together, you see us." He with white hair, me too. Anyway, he's a darling. Dustin, what an actor.
Yes. Leslie, has it been a good life?
Oh yes, a grand life. It's very hard sometimes. It costs a lot. It's like being a violinist or ice skater or pianist. Rehearsal, rehearsal, rehearsal. Thinking, thinking, thinking. Practicing, practicing, practicing. But who has that same luck of meeting the great people that I met? Meeting Christopher, meeting Renoir, and hearing the family stories of Jean Renoir telling me about Auguste and his mother. Absolutely fabulous. And it was like my home in Hollywood. I was able to ring the doorbell any day of the week, and I'd be welcomed in with a slice of salami and a glass of, not a glass, a silver goblet, if you please, always, for white wine.
I have heard about your life, I've heard about Hollywood firsthand, and it has been sensational.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Yes, indeed, the sensational Leslie Caron. I really enjoyed that interview so much. I hope you did as well. In a few moments, Dawn Leeson will be here, but that is the end of my programme for today. Now, there is a special edition of Sunday with Michael Portillo tomorrow, Christmas Day, at 7 p.m. for 1 hour, in which I'll be looking back at some of the highlights of the year on this programme. And then on New Year's Day at 2 o'clock, you can see the entire interview with Leslie Caron. Well, I'd like to thank all my guests today, particularly thank them today for coming in on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve. And I want to thank all of you for watching. I wish you a very happy Christmas. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow and on New Year's Day, and indeed for the next regular programme, which will be on Sunday, the 7th of January, back at the normal time of 11 until 1. Until then, happy Christmas. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I am Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. A windy picture as we go through Christmas Eve, some strong and gusty winds, bright in the north, damp in the south with some outbreaks of rain. Courtesy of this low pressure, damaging gusts of winds possible across the north of the UK, 60-70 miles an hour. Met Office warnings in force. Further low pressures moving in for Christmas Day itself. So a bit of a north-south split through Christmas Eve. Sunny spells, blustery showers across the northern half of the UK. Wind gusts of 60-70 miles an hour, so do take care if travelling. Further south, cloudy across England and Wales. Outbreaks of rain heavy across Wales for a time, and mild for everyone, exceptionally mild, 14-15 Celsius, making it one of the warmest Christmas Eves on record. As we move through the evening and overnight, further outbreaks of rain across southern parts of England and Wales. The winds stay strong for a time across northern Scotland, but easing later on. Clear spells here allowing a frost to form, but elsewhere generally mild, cloudy and showery outbreaks of rain with a brisk wind, and temperatures generally holding up 11-12 Celsius in the south, falling close to freezing. A few icy stretches to take us into Christmas Day here. And for Christmas Day itself, a lot of cloud across England and Wales. Some early brightness, but outbreaks of rain here, turning heavy at times too. Blustery showers further north, these falling as snow across the higher ground of Scotland, where it will be quite a cool day. Blustery for everyone, but exceptionally mild in the south, 12 or 13 Celsius.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for